This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 237 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today I have a special episode. It's about a book and an author which struck me as being very much on the thoughtful travel track, although also with some conflicting views. So anyway, I'll explain more in a minute. The episode is called Being a Tourist at Home with Jenny Herbert. So Jenny is a fellow Australian author, and I first heard about Jenny's new book, The Art of Being a Tourist at Home, thanks to my friend Catherine, who pointed me towards it after hearing Jenny interviewed on ABC Radio here in Australia, and I thought it did sound like something I would love. So I got an advance copy and I started reading it, and don't stress because I promise this gets better. I realised it was the complete... Oh, I didn't realise this. I thought at first it's the complete antithesis of the book I've just written. I started yelling at some of the pages and started writing like rebuttals on sticky notes. But don't worry, it didn't turn out as bad as all that. After a few more pages, I calmed down and I came to understanding that, so in the book, Jenny is kind of saying that we shouldn't travel and that we can replace travel by getting that experience of travel closer to home. And of course, astute listeners will know I have just written a book which is currently titled Why We Must Travel, outlining kind of why travel is so essential to our personal development. So they sound like the opposite, but actually at the heart of it, we are both saying really the same things about having the mindset of a thoughtful traveller. So that was how I approached this. And luckily, Jenny agreed to have a chat with me about the art of being a tourist at home. And this is our interview, so I hope you enjoy it. So, Jenny, your book is full of wonderful ways to get what I kind of think of as the travel feeling while we're at home. And I know that you started this book with the idea that because of climate change and over-tourism and those kind of things, we should travel less. And then the pandemic came along, which gave you like another reason to write this. So probably one of the few people who think the pandemic was good timing. Now, I also personally want to discourage people from travelling abroad for at least a bit longer. And so I really do love the ideas in there of how to get some of the benefits of travel without travelling. So I was wondering, could you give us perhaps a few of your top suggestions to do this?
I'd put exploring the arts at the top of the list, whether it's art galleries, concerts, theatre, museums. These are places where we're taken out of ourselves into new realms. But they're also there to tell us something about ourselves by examining aspects of the culture that defines us, illustrating for us who we are and how we make sense of the world around us. You could say that our arts institutions take us on amazing journeys into the heart of the place to which we belong. There's so much wonder revealed through the arts, wonder and insight and revelation. These are often the experiences we ask of travel. So the arts allow us to replicate the spirit of travel without climbing on an aeroplane. We can explore a wide range at little cost. There's so much of the arts that's easy and inexpensive to access, and we can keep returning over and over because it's local, always there on our doorsteps.
I think the arts is a very good point, and it's weird that I think lots of my listeners would agree we often only go to an art gallery or something like that when we're travelling. Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, people will go to the Prado, but they won't go to the National Gallery of Victoria in a couple of months' time when the Goyas are on. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I wonder, I sometimes think it's because we get caught up in our normal daily routine and life here, and so it's harder to break out of it. Like we had a new museum open here, or massively revamped museum open here in Perth late last year, and I have been 3 times, but that's probably more than nearly, most people I know, despite the fact that we can't really travel anywhere. But even to do that, I had to really seriously schedule it onto my calendar and say, I really want to do this. And I have to admit, if there was no pandemic, I probably wouldn't have done that at all. because I would have been focused on elsewhere. But like, it's amazing and it's so rich and so enlightening to see. And there's a lot of connections to, my local, I grew up in Perth. It was so fascinating to see that local stuff. So,
I mean, there's real value in learning about our own culture. I mean, we go to learn about other cultures, but what mostly influences us and who we are is the culture around us. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. We're all guilty of knowing more about other places often than about our own lives.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good point. All right, so another suggestion?
I would suggest immersion in green spaces. The green spaces all around us, whether it's in our home garden, a small local park, a botanic garden, or a national park. These are healing places. They connect us to the environment, they open our eyes to nature, and they encourage a slower pace. They're places where we flourish. And again, at little cost, either to us or to the natural environment. There's a common travel trope that champions the health and education benefits of going elsewhere. But a day, for example, spent in our local botanic garden fulfills both of these aims. There's beauty and peace. There are usually activities and good cafes. Often there's an innovative play area for kids. We might have travelled 1,000,000 miles from the hectic city.
So true.
Like the arts, our own natural environment is part of who we are. It shapes us. Overseas, we might view natural settings with interest, but it's in our own environments where we connect personally to the elements of landscape, flora and fauna. I can feel awe at seeing an elephant in the wild, but the echidnas in my garden and the kangaroos in the nearby bush actually mean more to me. They are, in a sense, part of who I am.
Jenny, do you really have echidnas in your garden?
I do.
Oh,
I live in the bush. I have wallabies and wombats and echidnas.
Oh, wombats are my favourite. Okay, I'm very envious of that. And my dad, until recently, lived in the bush, but there was no echidnas or wombats to be found. I mean, no wombats here anyway, and echidnas are very few and far between down our way.
We have a lot of echidnas.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I would be happy to go into your backyard instead of going many other places too.
Okay.
Oh, dear. Okay, so we're talking about the arts and green spaces. And
yeah, just the other thing on green spaces, there's a well-being element.
Oh, true. Yeah.
That Shinrin-yoku idea that the Japanese have of forest bathing, it feeds us in some important way.
Mm-hmm.
It's therapy for the body and the mind, but it also benefits the natural environment. When we come to see the natural environment in all of its complex beauty, we want to protect it for its own sake and for future generations. Yeah.
And I suppose when it's our local environment, we can visit it so much more frequently and in all seasons and get to know and understand it. So it's different to visiting a foreign national environment once or twice. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think getting to know it really well is a gift. It's a really special thing.
Yeah, yes. For sure. Yeah.
My third idea is food.
Food is good.
I think it's one of the simplest and most rewarding ways in which we can enjoy a sense of the expansion that we think we need to travel for, whether it be through the range of multicultural dining experiences on offer locally or the food we buy and prepare ourselves, with the way we can experiment with new ingredients and new ways of presenting food of other cultures at home. We can take a culinary excursion around our town and we can visit various cultural communities and attend their festivals to discover food from around the world. And in fresh food markets, these are places that express their cosmopolitan nature through the traders and the shoppers as well as the food itself. So they're my three top picks.
They are three very good picks. I wonder with the food part, I think in Australia and perhaps other similar nations, we're particularly blessed in having a very multicultural society. So there's lots of different kinds of restaurants and ingredients for lots of different kinds of cuisines are relatively easy to access. I know I had a friend who was complaining a while back when she'd spent a few months in Norway that she, and living in a relatively small town, she was going crazy by not being able to access lots of different kinds of Asian food, and even trying to recreate at home was hard because it was hard to get the ingredients. So we're lucky here, right?
We're lucky here. And I think we're lucky for another reason too. I think that a lot of these communities offer their food in an authentic way. I mean, you can go to an Italian restaurant in Britain, and it's a very British Italian experience. It's a
Ah.
very, but you can go to an Italian restaurant in Carlton here in Victoria, and it's a very Italian experience.
Right.
So there's that authenticity as well as just the availability.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we're pretty lucky for sure. So I often realise when I look at like my meal planning for the week, and even if we're just cooking at home, but I'll look and I realise that we have 4 or 5 different cuisines featured, and it's just completely normal. So, you know, and I think, oh, wow, how would I survive if I was eating like similar foods every night? So I remember I lived in Germany for a while, and obviously I cooked at home, so it was okay. But if we would go to German friends or relatives for meals, it really all started to taste the same after a while.
And a lot of meat and not much green.
Yes, exactly. And quite heavy. And I was like, oh, another German meal. Okay. There's some parts of it I loved, but it started to feel a lot the same compared to how we would usually eat here in Australia. So, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Lots of fabulous ideas. Now, some of these ideas sit with in my framework of being a thoughtful traveller. So I have some ideas of what I think a thoughtful traveller does before they travel abroad. So, for example, I love to do a deep dive into, say, movies and TV and books set in my destination before I travel. I know listeners who listened a couple of years ago when I went to Copenhagen will know how obsessed I became with Danish TV and Danish movies and Danish books. So I love to learn, just almost by osmosis, some of the culture and the local habits, and start to think about questions that I have that I want answered when I'm there. I was forever embarrassing my son by asking people like endless amounts of questions. We met a teacher and I asked her, half an hour worth of questions about the Danish education system, and my poor son was rolling his eyes in the corner. But anyway, so in a sense, I feel like your book is kind of a Bible for how to be a well-prepared, thoughtful traveller. So here's my big question is, do you really think we should never travel again? Or is there a case for thoughtfully choosing to travel abroad?
In an earlier book I wrote called The Intelligent Traveller, it was exactly about what you're saying. It was about how to prepare for your overseas travel to make it meaningful and worthwhile. But that book came out in 2008, and the world's changed since then. It came out when we weren't we weren't so aware of the climate crisis or over-tourism, and we certainly didn't have a pandemic closing our borders. So I think we're at the point now where we need to re-examine our need and purpose for travelling. If we can't travel because of closed borders or because we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we can instead shift our gaze to what's available on our doorstep, not as an inferior substitute. I think that's the really important point. We're not talking about something inferior here. We're just recognising staycations as having a potential in their own right. I certainly want to encourage people to question honestly why they travel and examine possibilities of satisfying wanderlust at home. I want to show how many valuable insights we can glean by exploring our local culture and our local backyard rather than rushing off overseas. We need to be independent-minded, not influenced by marketers and photoshopped images of supposedly pristine beaches, and not influenced by peer group pressure either. Not that sense that, well, everybody else does it, so I have to too.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
However, I'm not advocating. In the book, I say quite clearly, I'm not suggesting that we abandon all future travel. There'll always be.
Because then we couldn't be friends anymore, Jenny.
There will always be a need. The family will call us home, or we need to pursue a special interest, or there's one more thing on our bucket list that we just can't live without seeing. So there's certainly an element in my book that promotes the idea of stimulating our curiosity in what is immediately around us as a way of learning and practicing a valuable skill that will make us a better tourist when we travel away from home. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not the main point in my book, but it's an important one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sound dogmatic, but we've reached a stage where travelling for shopping or Instagram opportunities can't be justified.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree with that.
There's a moral imperative at the heart of our travel decisions. so that if we choose to travel, we have an obligation to do it in the most meaningful and worthwhile way that we can, which includes purposeful planning. And it also includes consideration of our host communities as well as our carbon footprint.
Yep. Yeah. Super important. Absolutely. Oh, you're so, yeah, okay. We are, although in some ways saying different things, we are saying also exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And what you said about questioning your reason for travel and being independent-minded about it, that is exactly how I think and what I'm always trying to encourage people to do. So why are we travelling? What's the purpose for you? And then I guess your part on top of that is, well, and mine too, is it important enough given other issues like the climate change and over-tourism or impact on communities we visit and all of that. So balancing all of that out. Yeah.
And, one of the really wonderful things about life is to be curious. And so it doesn't really matter where we exercise that curiosity, whether it's at home or overseas. It's the act of being curious, of being aware and alert to our environment that really matters.
Yeah. I think even though your book is focused on what we can do at home, I think you're dead right that it also is a really good way to start thinking about how you can travel more thoughtfully. It fits in with my thoughts on that really well. So, okay, very good. So I'm allowed to travel again. I don't know when I will travel again. It seems to be something that gets pushed out forevermore into the future, but one day. Yeah. But actually, I would love to talk to you about another topic in your book, which is walking. So actually, listeners of the Thoughtful Travellers Book Club will know we talk a lot about walking. We've had a real spate of walking books, but I have just been reading, actually I listened on Audible to Rebecca Solnitz's book, Wanderlust, A History of Walking, which is fabulous. And you reference that in your book as well. So tell me what we can learn from walking, whether we're walking in our own neighbourhood or somewhere new or whatever. Tell us about the wonderful world of walks.
Okay. Well, in the book, I use the example of the French flaneur, partly because I love the sound of the word and partly because of what it means, this stroller, this person wandering wherever their curiosity takes them, resistant to haste or pressure and free to get lost. And although there's a suggestion of aimlessness in the flaneur concept, the true flaneur is ambling in a nonchalant way but rarely purposeless. It's about not reaching a destination but about being alert to whatever presents itself along the way. It might take a change of scene to achieve this raised awareness, but it might also just take a fresh approach to what you think is familiar. So you could walk at a different time of day, or you could change the route that you usually take on your walk to work or to the bakery. Or you might decide that today I will take special notice of the gardens I pass or the architecture or the street art. And one of our great neglected resources at home is a visitor information centre. We think that they're just for visitors. They offer a wealth of information about our own home, often information that we just don't know. So by visiting them, we're likely to discover hidden corners in our city, or we might be alerted to some history that still exists amongst the skyscrapers and global shops. Just really special little things that will add to our sense of place. And all the time we're learning about home, what makes it special for us, how we fit in, how we belong. But we're also exercising. We're out in the fresh air, we're bumping into neighbours we haven't seen in an age. We're noticing that the wattle birds are building a nest in the banksia tree down the street.
Win-win.
Yeah, win-win. And, I know that lockdowns have been difficult for many people. There's no doubt about that. But they also taught us, I think, to value home in a new way, as both a refuge but also as a resource. And when we were released for that 1 hour a day to walk within our 5-kilometre radius, I think it opened our eyes to the neighbourhood in new ways that were, we learned, as the flaneur knows, to look beyond the familiar and to seek the surprising right there in our neighbourhood.
I think that's so true, and I immediately think of several friends in various parts of the world who documented those kind of walks on Facebook. So I have a friend in Singapore who went for a long walk every morning, and wow, I saw through her pictures, so many unexpected corners of Singapore, and I'm sure she felt the same. Or a friend who was living in the CBD of Melbourne and would walk in a different direction each day within the radius. And it's fascinating to see. And obviously they were finding all those new perspectives and, discovering things close to home. So, I think that you're right. It's, that lockdown scenario has been really eye-opening for discovering.
One of my early readers who lives in an outer suburb of Melbourne said, "Walk my local streets, you've got to be kidding, there's nothing to see, it'd be just awful." And then she was reduced to walking her local streets, and she would send me emails and say, today I saw a group of 3 trees, an ironbark in the middle and 2 ghost gums on either side. And she said, I just stood there spellbound for a moment. So this is a person who didn't believe that there was anything there whatsoever.
Yeah. Oh, that is fabulous. It's so true. I remember when I was living in Japan many years ago, and I was living in a really fairly dense part of Osaka at first, and then I moved further out closer to Nara, and it was, less dense in Japanese style. And so then I really, in eastern Osaka, it would have been impossible, but by then in the place near Nara, I was really obsessed with kind of documenting every little street and corner, and I had a map, and I would make sure I'd walked past them and tried out all the shops and restaurants and really got to know it all. And it was fascinating, and I'm so glad I did it.
And that's the way you felt a sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Funnily enough, I wrote a blog post about it, or I posted about that area where I'd lived and put some pictures up, and many years ago. But still, every couple of years, I'll get an email from someone, another expat like me, who had lived in that tiny area. Because I thought my boyfriend and I were the only foreigners. We never saw any other foreigners. But over the years, people have lived there, and I'll still get emails and they're like, "Oh yes," and I remember our supermarket played this terrible song in the fish aisle, and they would say, "I know that fish song too," and things like that. It was very, very connecting. So yeah.
Very nice.
Oh dear. Oh no, I love it. You're quite right. And I've always been a happy walker, and I do tend to, go in different directions and see what I see. But certainly in the last year or so, I've really paid even more attention than usual to what is out there. So
I think that happy walker idea is really good. I mean, it's one of the things that Solnit talks about, that meeting of mind and body and contentment just in the act of walking.
Yes. It is quite a special thing, because if you're doing more vigorous exercise, then often you're focused on the vigor of the exercise, or you're, I don't know, I don't run, but I imagine running too fast to really take it in. But walking is, it's actually a pretty special activity.
Yeah, it's a rhythm of life, isn't it? It's something that we were designed to do.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. All right. Now, the next thing I wanted to ask you about is about actually being abroad. So part of your argument is for staying closer to home is that that we can't learn as much when we're outsiders. So if we're in a foreign country, language and cultural barriers can prevent us from getting as much out of a foreign situation as we might do from a similar situation at home. And I completely see that point, but I also would argue that it's exactly those barriers that teach us so much. So I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Okay, so I'll try to explain where I came from with that. I've spent over 20 years working in the tourism industry, and I know that there's a surface presentation that you put on for visitors, and then there's this true self that you keep locked away somewhere else. And it's just part of your survival arsenal when you're being confronted with so many strangers every day, especially some of those strangers have this voracious appetite to know about your personal life. So, you learn to have a front stage and a backstage. That's just the way you divide things up. So as visitors, we need to keep in mind that the hospitality and courtesy that's being presented to us isn't the same as an invitation to belong. Mm-hmm. We're just passing through. We're never part of their history or part of their community. Our hosts are the ones who are there to stay. It's their home, and they need to keep aspects of it solely for themselves. And in this way, It's how they're striving to maintain distinctiveness in a world that's being homogenised, especially by tourism, in fact. And so these barriers, these backstages, are largely hidden from view, and it's that I'm saying we can't learn. They're not offered to us, and so we can't learn. Yet that's probably where the authentic life is lived by communities. And we have to keep in mind the impact that tourism numbers is having on these places.
That's very true, for sure, yeah.
Before the pandemic, many places were just drowning under the crowds, and housing was becoming unaffordable, and governments were seriously turning their attention to how they managed numbers in ways that protected local assets, whether that be built form or social.
Natural.
But I'd also say, Amanda, that many tourists really don't care about the culture that they're passing through.
That's sad but true, you're quite right. Yeah.
Instagram image, the places that are in front of an iconic site, they're there for entertainment more than for enlightenment. Because how else could you possibly explain the popularity of Juliet's balcony in Verona? I mean, Juliet, it's total fraud. Juliet is a fictional character.
Yes.
The balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet.
It can't be her real balcony because she never existed.
And Shakespeare wouldn't have known what a balcony was. So still people flock to it. So
that's such a good example. Yeah, no, you're quite right. And I live in this bubble because of the wonderful listeners I have on the podcast where, in general, they're very, very thoughtful travellers. And so they travel in a more purposeful way. But sadly, you are right that the vast majority of travellers or tourists are perhaps not even close to thinking that yet. But it is my ambition to change the world and make them all think that way. But you're quite right.
Yeah. The other point I'd make is you're absolutely right. There are thoughtful travellers in the world. But there are people who go out to learn about difference in ways that they hope to increase tolerance.
Yes.
And I think in that it's invaluable. But I'd also say that in a time when more people travel, we have got increasing intolerance, and I don't know how you explain that.
True.
But that's pretty dismal, and one of the purposes of my book is to be positive. And I'd say cultural barriers exist on our doorstep.
True.
If we take time to get to know our immigrant next-door neighbour or the family who runs the local Indian restaurant, if we listen to their stories, if we help where we can, if we maybe adopt some of their ways, we're probably doing more to achieve tolerance than a lot of travel can achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very fair, yeah. And also I often come at this with my very privileged, lucky experiences of being able to live abroad where I've been in one place for a couple of years or more. And that's obviously another, completely different dimension where you can start to get into that authentic life. And obviously not everyone has that opportunity. So, yeah.
Yes, this is a book looking at travel as just a holiday.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now one section of your book talks about how to have more balance at home so you can take time out and appreciate these travel-ish benefits. Now, in the past, so in fact, it hits on something that I've thought about a lot in the past 18 months because I'm a bit of a workaholic and I'm self-employed. So, I work from home. So work never stops. I'm a single parent. I'm doing a lot of driving to soccer training and things like that. Yeah. And so in the past, my travel time was also one of those times that was very precious in the fact that I could switch off from all the other stuff and really indulge my love of, curiosity and learning and all of that. So I would love some tips from you, please, on how I can carve out these experiences into this life. Help.
I don't know whether I'll be able to help you completely, but
even a little bit would be great.
If we compare a staycation with an overseas trip, you could consider the amount of time wasted in travelling internationally.
Mm-hmm.
If you
should try coming from Perth. We spend a lot of time going anywhere.
Yes, that's right. Or I live in Meetong, which is a 3.5-hour drive before I even get to an airport. So.
Okay, yes. You understand then.
I understand. But in a fortnight's holiday, you might spend 2 or 3 days in queues and in flights and in working out the bus timetable and in finding your hotel. Whereas at home, every minute belongs to you. And so staycations can actually be seen as fantastic time savers.
That is a good approach, yes.
So there you go. So there's one.
Yep.
If we use our staycations to get to know more about the value of theatre, or how to navigate the art gallery, or how to or to understand just the vaster range of material in the local museum, that is, if we discover how important these places can be in our lives, then with our newfound familiarity, they're always there for us to slip into and enjoy whenever the free moments arise after our holiday ends. Okay, so the person the art historian who I interviewed for the art gallery chapter, she talked about just getting to know a small part of the art gallery, and maybe even just adopting a couple of paintings that are your own, and you just go and visit them on regular occasions. It's very beautiful.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
It might be just in your lunchtime or for 5 minutes after work, you know. So these are just ways. We develop so many bad habits, especially in the way of time wasting. So if we staycation to say, okay, we're going to acknowledge our bad habits, we're going to get rid of them, and we're going to replace them with these new sorts of ways of bringing these pleasures into our lives, then that makes a staycation pretty special.
Well, you're very convincing. Yes. I will listen over to this several times and try and instill this into my brain. I love the idea of adopting a painting or two at the art gallery. When my son was little, it's funny, a lot of these things I find they were easier to do when you were a semi-stay-at-home parent with a young child. A lot of these things are things we do more naturally then, which is interesting. But we often went to the art gallery because we'd be in town for some other reason, and we would go in literally to one section where there was a painting, and I think it was actually like a mining kind of scene, but he was obsessed with rubbish trucks. And he thought that this painting was of rubbish trucks. And so we would go in and check up on that painting again. And it's exactly that. He adopted a painting. So he probably doesn't even remember, but we often went. So, yeah, I would love to do that for myself again.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
Great example.
We have recently been to Canberra for the Botticelli exhibition. And, you know, it's much quicker. It saves a lot of time for us to go to Canberra rather than to Europe.
True. And you can actually go there now.
Yes. And, you know, a lot of the world's great art, if you wait long enough, it comes to your doorstep. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. All right. Well, thank you. And I will be posting with the podcast show notes some more information about this book of yours, because it is a really fabulous, really interesting read for a thoughtful traveller kind of person. So good luck. I know it's being launched this week, and wish you all the best with it.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much.
So I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jenny. I definitely don't agree with everything that Jenny said, but our basic philosophy really is similar. We both want people to think about travel in a really thoughtful and purposeful way. And as I said somewhere in the interview, I really think my view is skewed by all my fabulous listeners and members of the Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group, because we have a tendency to travel with, you know, interesting purposes in mind. So we're not typically tourists who go somewhere just for the Instagram shot. So I think I do have that bias already. But because of that, I really do recommend her book. It was really interesting, and I learned a lot and made me think a lot about how I can get this, you know, purposeful approach to learning about the world and about the world's people while I am still here, unable to travel much, which kind of harks back to episode 236, which I just released over the weekend about, you know, me not traveling very much at the moment. So I thought that was interesting. But I do really still firmly believe that there's something quite different about being in a foreign place. It's something that you really can't recreate near home in the same way. I think it is important to at least sometimes get significantly outside of your comfort zone to really get some of the many, many benefits of travel. But still really worthwhile to think about how we can replace some of that travel with things closer to home. So I hope you enjoyed this chat. It made me think a lot. So a huge thank you to Jenny, and her book is out basically around the world from tomorrow, I think, if you're listening to this episode live. So it's called it's called The Art of Being a Tourist at Home by Jenny Herbert. So do keep an eye out. There'll be a link in the show notes as well. I'm also going to link up a couple of old episodes in the show notes which are particularly relevant. One is episode 220, which is called How Travel Really Helps Us Understand the World, which is a kind of a preview to a section of my book about why we must travel. And also I mentioned in this interview, I mentioned my episode about my pre-trip thoughts before going to Copenhagen and Denmark about how to be a thoughtful traveller, which kind of really aligns with a lot of the things that Jenny is saying in her book. So that was episode 140. So I'll leave links to those in the show notes. The show notes for this episode you will find at notaballerina.com/237. And of course, don't forget to come along and join the Facebook group if you're not already there. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. There's a link in the show notes, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook. So I hope that leaves you with some food for thought. I'd love to hear what you think. Come along and chat in the group and let me know. And as always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.